Now, welcome to this session where we are going to set up our forensic workstation. So you can find the tutorial for this on the Blue Cape Security site, and then under tutorial, there is a Build Your Forensic Workstation link. So this tutorial, we don't have to go through all the details, but what we are trying to achieve here is we want to set up the hypervisor if you haven't done so yet, and then we are going to install a Windows VM with Ubuntu Linux on top of it. And this is because we want to be leveraging the Windows Subsystem for Linux feature, which allows us to run both environments and to actually use the best of both worlds, where we can be using Windows tools and we can be using Linux-based tools. And we can see on the right-hand side, there's a number of tools already listed. We won't need all of these, so we'll just download a selected few, which are still very common and widely used in the industry, but freely available either for training purposes or just open source in general. Now, we will be setting up the hypervisor and then following by the Windows Guest VM. And there's actually a very quick and easy way to do so. There are free Windows trial versions around that you can just use and download, which come with a 90 or 180-day trial period. So we will be setting up a Windows 2019 server version, and that's gonna come with a VHD, which means it's already pre-installed. We don't have to go through the entire installation process. So this is why we're trying to keep this to a minimum and go through this as quickly as possible, because we still will have to do a little bit of additional setup to do, which is actually installing WSL. And very important, especially if you're running on VirtualBox, we will need to install WSL manually. And also we need to make sure that it's going to be version 1 and not version 2, because that's not compatible with VirtualBox. So we'll go through that later and then install Ubuntu on top of it. Following by that, we'll then do a couple of configuration, just best practices on the Windows environment that I, for example, like to do as part of my forensics workstations. And then we'll go to download and install the forensics tools we need. So instead of going into much of the details around why a VM, and there is different hypervisors, type 1 and type 2 out there, which have definitely implications in terms of performance, we're going to pick VirtualBox because this is just supported across any of the operating systems that you might be using, and it's free to use as well. So let's just go to the workstation setup instructions here. So you can see the first thing is download and install the hypervisor. So let's go ahead and just click on the VirtualBox link, and this is going to open up the VirtualBox site, where now you can pick based on your host system, which is either Windows, Mac, or Linux, for example. Just download the respective binary, and then we can already go ahead and install the VirtualBox installer. So for me, this is the Mac version. I'll just download that. And while that is loading, we can already skip to the next step, which is install the guest VM. So a couple of considerations. You can, of course, use all kinds of different Windows versions. If you have any dedicated systems available or even a physical system, that's great. For virtualization, we just want to make sure, especially on a lab or like a test environment, that a VM is just really easy to reset and go back to a known good state in case you, for example, executed malware or are done with an analysis and it's just a mess of files on there. It's really nice to have the capability of a VM where you can just reset back to a known good state. And that's just why we want to do this, especially as part of this course. We also propose a Windows Server 2019 VHD version. So 2019, the server, because it's just less tools on there, like as compared to a Windows 10, for example. It's just less stuff that's running in the background. It's just a better performance. And also the VHD allows us to run it immediately instead of downloading an ISO and then having to go through the entire installation process of the Windows operating system first of all, before we can even use it. So we will download the VHD directly. If you want to, however, choose to use a different option or different version of Windows, there's this post out here by Microsoft, the tech community page. There's actually an interesting post here that actually has links to Windows client 90-day evaluations. You can see Windows 11, Windows 10, and then there's also links to Windows Server 2022 and 2019 directly to the ISOs as well as to the VHDs. So What you would usually have to do here is you have to go through the evaluation center and then register for downloading an ISO or VHD, but there's also the direct links available, so you can just go ahead and use the VHD direct link here, or any other system if you prefer, so that is linked on this tech community page. So in our case, we'll just go ahead with the VHD, the direct link. This is gonna open the download window. Just gonna go ahead and save this. And then let this download, and while this is loading, a couple of next things to consider when we are going to set up the VM. Some of the requirements that we have here, 100 gigabyte disk for the course, that's fine. Overall, that's of course up to you and depends on the case and how much data you think you will need. Overall, dynamically allocated is always a great choice, because that just means that the disk will only grow in size as we put more data on it, and we won't have to allocate the 100 gigabytes, for example, here right away. And then, as always with RAMs and CPUs, the more the better, especially with the tools that we are running here. We can absolutely get away with 4 gigabyte of RAM and 2 CPUs. If you have more available, like 8 gigabyte of RAM and more CPUs, the more the better. Things will just run faster, but this is definitely enough for the purposes here. Networking, we definitely need internet access, so NAT networking by default is fine. And as soon as the Windows system is set up, we also want to go ahead and install the VirtualBox Guest Edition, so that we can then at least drag and drop files and use the bidirectional clipboard to copy and paste. And especially we want to use folder sharing, so that we can download tools to our host system, then just access them through the VM by the shared folders. And once that is done, we will then take a snapshot, because then we'll have a clean state. And then before we move on to the next phase, which is setting up the WSL and the Ubuntu environment. All right, so now we should have downloaded the VirtualBox application, or the installer actually, and then also a really super long name, which is essentially the Windows 2019 VHD. So first things that we need to do is execute the VirtualBox installer and just click through the installation process. There's nothing special to do. Just click through that, and then I'll see you once you're done with a window that should look something like this. So this is the VirtualBox Manager, and we will be going to add a new virtual machine based on the recently downloaded Windows 2019 server. So what we need to do is now, because we actually only have a VHD, which a VHD is a virtual hard disk, we just have a disk. And so now we just need to set up in VirtualBox Manager a new VM. So we go to New, and then we can name it something like Windows 2019, and then maybe FOR for forensics. Pick the name of your choice. And then for version and type, we need to pick Windows and 64-bit 2019. And then when we continue, now here's the part where you can pick the memory as much as you have available for this. So 2 gigabyte is fine. I'm gonna set it to 4 gigabytes. And then the next one is create a hard disk, and now we actually have a hard disk, so we can use an existing virtual hard disk file. And then what you need to do here is you just go to choose, and then you might not have anything around here, because that's my previous VMs that I still have attached here, but you can go to add, and then when you go to add, you can go to your downloads folder wherever you put the VHD file, and then just select this file and open it. So now you see this is not attached, and once we choose it, we assign it to the VM, and then we should be good to go. All right, so this is now freshly imported, and once we are clicking start, this is going to start up the VM, and it actually will make us go through some of a quick installation process, but not really the entire operating system at all. One thing that we can do now before we start it up, because that would actually then be before it triggers the counter of our evaluation period, we can just take a snapshot. So we take a snapshot and we just say initial import. And so click OK here. So because now anytime later on when the VM expires, you can actually revert back to this initial import and don't have to just create a new VM all the time all over again. And now we can go ahead and click start. So now you can see this is Windows booting up, and I'll fast forward where needed and then just catch you whenever we have to enter any information or make any selections. All right, so the first thing is we need to select the country and the keyboard layout. And then next thing is license terms, accept. And now you see that there's already a user account defined, which is administrator. That's a user account on every Windows Server system. So we're going to be administrator and just need to set up a password now. So once you have your super secret password, we're going to continue the installation. So now we can see Control-Alt-Delete to unlock. And that means we need to go up on the top to the VirtualBox menu. And then from there, go to keyboard and insert Control-Alt-Delete. There's also a shortcut for this if needed. But now I can see use administrator and entering password. All right, so the desktop has started up. So we still have to wait a little. There's a couple more things that are going to be loaded. Okay, so now we can see couple things real quick. So network discoverable here can do either yes or no. That won't matter. Now you can see a Windows Server always usually by default is starting up the Windows Server Manager. If you haven't seen that before, that's what it looks like, but we don't need it. So we can do don't show this message again. And then we can go to manage and the server manage properties to not have it start up every time we log on to the system. So we don't need it again, so that's why it's fine to disable auto start. And that's it. So now we have a brand new Windows Server 2019 evaluation, good for 180 days. So what we can do, first of all, since we're already logged in here, let's install VirtualBox guest editions, because that would allow us to finally go to full screen and also a couple more things. So in order to do that, we need to insert the guest edition CD image. So let's just go ahead and do that. And once that's in there, we can see Windows wants to start it up automatically. So let's just do a run. And then this is just a very simple setup process. So we can just click next, next, next. Now it's asking us to reboot. So that's okay. Let's just reboot the system. All right, let's log on again. And then once the system is started up and the drivers are loaded in the background, we should be able to use the guest editions, and that will help us to resize the window and go to full screen. If I just do full screen now, you can see the window automatically just resized. And then what we can do on top of it is now with the guest editions installed, we can add a shared folder. So we can share a folder with our host system. And that is really convenient because that's where we can then share the downloaded forensic tools between the host and our guest VM. So I'm gonna share my documents folder, and then auto mount and make permanent is convenient. So we have it in our file system every time. So now you can check if that has worked by opening up the File Explorer and then go to your PC. And from there, you should be seeing now a network location. So this is the VirtualBox, the C drive, which now is showing us the content of our host's documents folder. So that's great. That's what we will be using later. And then last thing is we can also enable bidirectional shared clipboard. So for copy and paste, and also drag and drop. Sometimes VirtualBox doesn't like it. It doesn't, in my experience, it's not always working, but if it works, it's actually a nice feature to have. Okay, and this is now actually a really good point where we should be taking a snapshot, because this is a clean, fresh setup system, and we can just revert to this anytime in case anything is gonna break. So let's just go ahead and power down the system. And once it's powered down, we can then go ahead and take the snapshot. Here we are back in the VirtualBox Manager. Let's just do take and say Windows setup, the snapshot name, and VirtualBox guest editions installed, so that we know what the state is going to be if we ever revert to this. And that's good to go now. So we can now continue with the next couple steps, which will be a couple configuration items on the Windows environment, and then also setting up Windows Subsystem for Linux and the Ubuntu environment. We can now power up the system again, our Forensic Workstation, and then look into the next steps that we're going to do. So this will be here back in the Build Your Forensic Workstation tutorial number 3, enable Windows Subsystem for Linux, WSL, and installing Ubuntu. So there is one really important piece to this. So we can just follow these instructions and those should be fine, but it's really important to understand that there is WSL2 out there, and then there's WSL1. VirtualBox, if you're running on VirtualBox, it does not support WSL2, but there are some instructions that just will install WSL, and then you might end up with WSL2, and that will just not work. So we need to make sure that we are going through these instructions by installing WSL1 and just leave it with that, and then we can install the Ubuntu distribution on top of it. The instructions for the Windows 2019 server are all here, but if you just click on this link, there's also the original Microsoft installation guide, which on the left hand side you can see there's install WSL, which is actually a script that would install WSL version 2, so don't do that. Manual installation step for older versions. That's how to manually install WSL 1 and 2 on a Windows 10, for example. So that's why we need to stick with this one, install Windows Server. And it's actually pretty straightforward then, because all you need to do is run a PowerShell command to enable WSL. Then we need to download manually a Linux distribution, and then we need to rename and unpack the distribution, and then we run another PowerShell command which is going to install the environment. So those are the easy steps that we need to follow. I have it all here in this tutorial as well, so I'm going to stick with this. Now let's go back to the Windows Forensic Workstation and then log in. Okay, so once we're back, now we can go over here and just copy and paste this command. Then open up a new PowerShell window, as you can see here, but right click and run as administrator. This is the most important part here. We just can do paste. So this command looks okay. And once you're ready, you can hit enter. So we need to restart the computer to complete this operation. So yes, we're gonna do that, because otherwise we won't be able to install the Ubuntu environment. All right, and while this is booting up, let's go back to the website. And it also says download the Ubuntu distribution here. So if we go to this link, or also if you're following the Microsoft instructions, it would point you to this download page. So there's different Linux versions that you can install. We just want to stick with the standard Ubuntu one. So in that case, if you click on this, it lets us download this Ubuntu AppX bundle. So let's just go ahead and do that. So let's put it into the documents folder, because that's where we have our shared drive. So I'm just going to put it in here. And then back on our Windows system, we can log on. Okay, so now let's open up our File Explorer and navigate to our network location, to the Documents folder. And here we have the Ubuntu AppX bundle. So what we can do now is we can actually now just rename it. So if we go back to our instructions, it actually says when downloaded, rename the package from AppX bundle to zip and then extract the archive. So let's just do a rename and then call it zip. And say yes. And then we can do extract all. And let's just browse to, in this case, our own downloads folder so that we have it on our system and we don't have to install it through the network share. So it's important. This is now our own administrator's downloads folder. All right, so now if we go to downloads, you should see all these different packages here. So there's packages for different types of architectures, and we definitely need to install the Ubuntu x64-bit version. So this is the command, and if we go back to our browser, we can see here install the x64 app package. So basically this means add-appx package and then point to this package. Now for that we also need a PowerShell, run PowerShell as the administrator. In this case, a couple of ways to get there, but you can already go up to File and then say PowerShell administrator right here. Okay, so once more we can just check if everything is here by running dir. So there is the Ubuntu package. This is what we need to install. So the command was add appx package. All right, so autocomplete worked, and then Ubuntu, and we can tab through this all the way until you see this x64. So this is the 64-bit version that we need to install now. And if you have that, you can just hit enter. And that should take care of the rest. Okay, that was pretty quick. Now, what's next? We still need to run Ubuntu in order to finish the installation. And if you go to your start menu, you can see Ubuntu new or Ubuntu here recently added. Either one, just execute it. And then it's going to finish up the installation. And we'll have to set up the user account, username and password. And that is going to be it then. All right, and a couple minutes later now, we are asked to enter a Unix username. So just say forensics. Same for the password. Updated successfully, and that is it. So now we are set up with an Ubuntu environment on our Windows Server system. Now it's pretty basic, so it just comes out of the box with a version that might need a couple of updates. So sudo apt update definitely is a good idea to do that when you have time. It might take a while, but for now, no need to worry about that yet. We just wanted to set it up, and so we have our objectives accomplished. The last thing that we want to do before we can take another snapshot and really consider this Windows system set up is we can now go back to the instructions, because this is going to tell us a couple of configuration changes and items that we want to consider for this system. And this is just more personal preference or just industry best practices. So first and foremost, your forensic systems should always be on the UTC time zone. And this is best practice because you have a lot of different tools running and doing parsing and data analysis. And if they produce different outcomes based on different time zones, it's getting really difficult. So a consistent time zone, even starting with the operating system, always defaulting to UTC, is definitely the best practice in the forensic industry. And so next thing we can do right away is show hidden files in the file name extensions in the File Explorer. So that's just something that makes viewing files easier. And then one thing that we can do for this course is we need to create a cases folder and a tools folder, because that's where we're going to place those files, and those will need to be get an exception by Microsoft Defender. So we want to turn off a lot of Defender settings, but also one thing that we can't turn off is real-time protection. So easily we could technically do it with a GPO, but there's no need. All we need to do is just exclude the cases and the tools folder from the Defender scope, so that it actually is not gonna pick up any files in there and delete the files as we are working our cases. So let's just go through these steps real quick, and then our system should be all set up and we can move to installing some of the tools that we need. Okay, so the first thing that we said was, let's go to the time and then adjust date time, right click. So then here we can see set time automatically is fine. Just don't do time zone automatically, and then we want to do our time zone to UTC, which is 00. So here we have coordinated universal time. All right, so first step done. Then the next one is, now let's create a cases in a tools folder, and I just like to do that right on the C drive. This prevents us from having to type long path names as we are using those tools. So first thing is, we want to create a new folder and just call it cases. And the second thing is the tools folder. And one thing we also wanted to do was go into view, and then we can also do show hidden files, show file name extensions. That's just making things easier. You can already see a hidden folder here. And then the last thing that we wanted to do is the Defender settings. So we can close out this window and then just type in the start menu, just start typing something like threat. And this should bring up virus and threat protection. Okay, and in virus and threat protection settings, we now want to go into the manage settings and then just do real-time protection. So this is the Defender that is going to enable itself after a while again. So we can keep that on. That will change anyways later on, but we can permanently disable cloud deliver protection. We can do automatic sample submission, turn it off. And then the last thing we want to do is the exclusions. So we want to exclude the two folders that we just created from being scanned by Defender. So let's do add exclusion for a folder. And then go to our C drive. Then select cases. And then one more, we can go to folder. And here we can select the tools. Again, really important so that our cases and evidence files as well as tools are not going to get deleted by Defender. Okay, I think that was it for the setup process before installing any tools. So let's shut down, let's take a snapshot, because that is also another good milestone that we might want to revert back to at some point. So here we can go to take again, and then we can say Windows config, so WSL and Ubuntu setup and Windows configuration, which implies the Defender changes, for example. All right, so now the system is all set up and ready to go. We now just need to download and install the forensics tools that we specifically need for our course. So we're gonna do that in the next video. And another thing that's really practical about having access to a shared folder on our host system is that we can download all the applications and tools that we need through our host system and then just pull them in to the guest system through the shared folder. there's no need to download the tools and everything through our virtual machine here. This would be much slower, and the files would also be gone if you ever were to delete the machine. There's a couple tools you need to actually register for, and you might want to have those on your host system so that they are available at any time, and also for any other virtual machine that you might install in the future. So now the first thing we want to be doing is we want to have a browser on our virtual machine so that we can actually access things that we need to access in the next couple of videos. And to do so, we want to be using Firefox, for example. So this is my browser on the host system. Let's just Google Firefox, download the binary, and install it on our guest system. So if I go to Firefox and download, we can then just go ahead and start downloading Firefox onto the host system. Now I'm on a Mac. It automatically would actually make me download Firefox for Mac. Now we need to see that there is additional download options in other languages. So we want to have Firefox, and we need Firefox for our Windows 64-bit version. So let's go ahead and download. And yep, we want to have it right in our tools folder in the documents. And then we go back to our guest system, open up tools, and now we never had to access or open up our Internet Explorer, which is pretty painful especially the first couple steps on the Windows server. Let's just go ahead and execute and run the Firefox setup and the installation guide here, and then from here on we can then use Firefox as the default browser on the system. So let's walk through the installation guide, click next, 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 and install. All right, so the installation is finished. You can launch Firefox now. Brand new Firefox browser on our guest system. This is what we want, and this is going to help us a lot with the next couple steps when we need access to the internet. Okay, now let's install some of the Windows tools. Before we can do so, we actually need to download them. And the best way to do that is, again, let's download these tools onto our host system, and then we can access them through the virtual machine shared folder. Now, the links to these tools, you will find them below the video, but I've already opened up my browser here on my host system, and you can see them up here. So first of all, we need to download and install Arsenal Image Mounter. That's pretty straightforward. Just hit the download button and you will get the binary. Next, we want to get CAPE, which is Scroll Artifact Parser and Extractor. To get CAPE, you actually need to register. So you go ahead, click the download button, and then fill in the form. And from there, you should get a link to download the parser. Next, we want to download Eric Zimmerman tools. That's pretty straightforward. This is just the link here. So you click Get Zimmerman Tools, and this is going to download a zip file, which essentially is just a archived PowerShell script. Now, Redripper. For Redripper, you can download it from the GitHub repository and click on the code button and download zip file. And last but not least, Event Log Explorer. Now this one is also something where you need to register for. So if you are on this page, you click download, you will have to enter your information to get an email with the link. And let's make sure that for the intended use, actually you're picking home and free version for personal use. So that will help you with your lab, and you will get a license that you can then enter once the application is installed. And finally, we also have Notepad++ or a text editor of your choice. Alternative options are also Visual Studio Code, which is great. I just prefer to do Notepad++ on our forensic machine. So if you go in the Notepad++ and download section, you can download the first option right there. And we'll see you in the next video after I have all the applications downloaded to my host system as well. Okay, now in here you can see the tools I've downloaded. Now I've already extracted the ones that were archived. So for example, Redripper, here's the contents of the Redripper repository. Now for Notepad, here's the installation binary. CAPE, extracted here. And then EC tools. So this is easy is my Eric Zimmerman tools. This is something that you should also be doing. Create a easy tools folder, because that's where we are going to install the Eric Zimmerman tools into. And then for Event Log Explorer, there is the setup binary and Arsenal image mounter. The files are all located in here. So let's go back to our virtual machine, to the Forensic Workstation. If you haven't done so, now it's time to start it up again. And now back on our Forensic Workstation, we can just open up the shared folder, the folder that is shared with our host system, and we can now go into tools and just copy over all the tools that we've just downloaded. So we're going to select them all and then hit copy. And then now local disk, we have our tools folder, and copy them into tools. So this is going to take a little while, and I will fast forward to then be ready to install some of those applications. All right, so the tools have finished copying. For Arsenal image mounted, there's nothing to do. We do not need to install this application, but we need to install Event Log Explorer. So let's go ahead and execute the setup. Accept license. Next, 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 and just go through the installation process. Create a desktop shortcut, yes, that's fine. Launch, nope, so finish that one. Now Event Log Explorer wants us to visit their website, so let's keep that loading in the background. In the meantime, we can go and install the next tool. So we go back to tools, and this is going to be interesting. Now this is the Eric Zimmerman tools. If we go into this folder, you can see that Eric Zimmerman tools is actually a PowerShell script. So what we need to be doing here is we need to use PowerShell to install the Eric Zimmerman tools. So we are already in the Windows Explorer, so we can go up on File, and we can now say open Windows PowerShell. So this is going to load the PowerShell engine. Okay, now so we are back in PowerShell. Let's just autocomplete the Get Zimmerman tools, and before we hit enter, we can choose for which .NET framework we want to install these tools. So it used to be .NET version 4. Now there's a version 6 available, which is actually not installed on this system at the time of recording. So let's just choose the tools for the .NET version 4. For .NET 6, it would just be an overhead to download those as well. So we do net version and then 4. And really important, it's going to download and drop all the tools within this folder that we're currently in. So easy tools is exactly where we want to be in. This is a good location to download these tools into. Now hit enter, and that might take a while because there's a whole number of tools that this is going to grab now. Okay, so here we have our full installation of the Eric Zimmerman tools. These are all the tools that were downloaded, and very important that the PowerShell script is actually really handy. If you run it again, it matches the information that it's saved in this CSV file, and if this is used to determine if there's a newer version to download or not. So if you just run the script again, you can keep those tools updated by just using the script. Now you can see this is our easy tools folder, and there's a whole number of tools where we are going to be using a few of those. And back to the installation, Now Cape doesn't need an installation, Retripper doesn't need installation, so the last thing we need to do is let's get Notepad installed, good old Notepad, and once that is done we can conclude the initial setup of the Forensic Workstation. For those of you who might have noticed, we have installed the Linux subsystem, but we have not installed any tools yet, so we will deal with the volatility installation that we need in the memory forensic analysis section at a later time. So here I'm going through the Notepad installation and I want to create a shortcut. Yes, that's fine. And hit next. Don't need to run it. Say finish. And that's it, great. So now we have our forensic tools available. We have installed them. I think the best thing we can do right now is actually power down the system and take a snapshot, because that would now allow us to restore this system and we do not have to go through the installation process again if we were to revert back to a previous state. So let's go to the start menu, shut down. And for this snapshot, we can see the tools here. What I like to do is, again, let's take a snapshot, say Windows tools installed, and add a description that includes the tools that we've installed here. So we can just go ahead and copy and paste, or you can type it in there. So we have a better sense of when we restore from this point on, that we know what's on there. Hit OK. And that's it. Perfect. Now we have also fully installed Windows Forensic Workstation with the basic tools on there that we need for the rest of this course.